Hey, everybody, welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Brief. The best of what we learned this week and some new things you haven't learned at all, because we're going to have some of those today. And in fact, let's just get right into it. Let's start with what you don't know yet, what we haven't been able to talk about, because this happened just yesterday after we did our last show of the day, but it is really, really important. That is President Trump talking about what he is going to do the easy way or the hard way.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor. Okay? I would like to make a deal, the easy way, but if we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way. There are Russian destroyers, there are Chinese destroyers and bigger. There are Russian submarines all over the place. We're not going to have Russia or China occupy Greenland, and that's what they're going to do if we don't. So we're going to be doing something with Greenland, either the nice way or the more difficult way.
Okay, lot to unpack there. Let's just talk about, first of all, at the NATO level and at the ally level. What this shows to me is that one of the things I've been warning about for months now is that the more President Trump gets away with doing things apart from the rule of law, apart from the Constitution, apart from international law, apart from the rules-based order, just the norms that have governed, especially activities among allies, the further we get away from that without any consequence, and the more he can just do whatever he wants, it's going to make his appetite grow for more. So it was one thing when it was going after Iran, even though that violated the Constitution, and internationally there was no justification for the United States using lethal military power against Iran in conjunction with Israel. We did it because we wanted to. There were no consequences for that. It's still, from our allies' perspective, it was one thing when you're going after the Houthis in the Red Sea and you're killing people there. Even though there's no mandate for that, no authorization, that's one thing. Or when you went into Nigeria and you started using military force there, or even when you go into Venezuela, because a lot of people will say, that's a little bit more weird, but okay, it's in your hemisphere, I guess you can do it. But you see, every time Trump does something, there's no consequence. Nobody holds him back. Nobody holds him accountable. Now, all of a sudden, he's looking into Europe's backyard and saying Greenland, that's kind of in our hemisphere. Technically speaking, it's up in the Arctic, but it's technically in our hemisphere. I want it. I'm going to get it. And he talked about this for a while. He's been talking about it since he came into office, and it kind of went on the backside. You could see that many of the European leaders said, well, that's just Trump being Trump. He doesn't really mean that. I mean, I get it. It's important, but that's not going to happen. So, look over here. Let's talk about this. And they seem to get him off the track. And then a bunch of other stuff happened in the Middle East. And then, with the Russia-Ukraine war and all that, and Putin trying to get a negotiated settlement, kind of took his eye off the ball on that and just forgot about it. Well, something has happened recently that put the ball right back in his face. And especially after the Maduro thing, I think his hunger is growing more. And now he sees, who's going to tell me no? And we showed you earlier this past week about Stephen Miller making these pretty bold and direct statements that we will not take military power off the table. We will not, who's going to fight us over this? You may remember him saying, and I mentioned at the time, that is the deputy chief of staff for the president of the United States. This is not just some talking head. So when he says this and it's not contradicted by the president, then you have to take that as legit. That was not anywhere near as strong as what he said with his own mouth yesterday. And so now then Europe is scrambling, thinking, holy cow, he must really mean it, because he's been making these statements here over the week. But that was by far the strongest statement he has made to date. And now Europe is coming to grips and trying, and I'm sure they're panicking behind the scenes here. They're trying to have measured statements during the week. They made that statement about, this will be decided by Denmark and Greenland alone. Well, that's fine, but you didn't even, it wasn't even a rebuke of the U.S. There's just kind of this tepid, passive statement, and you see it had no impact whatsoever on Trump. And so now he's saying he's going to take it the easy way or the hard way, meaning no one is going to tell me no. And so I think Denmark, NATO, they're all having to come to grips with, we may lose this country. We may lose the control of this, and the U.S. is going to take it, because right now they're probably right. Is somebody going to be willing to use military force against the United States? I don't think so. They despise us and they hate it, but this is so far beyond the possibility of anything that's even been in their worst nightmares imagined. But now here it is right on top. And I would wager that Trump is not going to give them time to figure this out and to, kind of calm their nerves and to come up with some course of action. I would wager that he would do something sooner rather than later before they get a chance to muster up the courage. We'll wait and see how that plays out. But that's the domestic or the allied issues that we're looking. Let's look at the justification issues, because that is also critically important here. And we got to be gut level honest. We are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is. And when something happens and it does not cast well on our side, on the Americans, it doesn't look good on us, we have an obligation. We have chosen to have this obligation to tell you the truth, no matter what. This is one of those cases. The justification he used there, that if we don't do this, Russia or China will take over. That is absurd. There is no way that they would do that. They don't have the ability to project power, neither China nor Russia. Why in God's name would they want to do that? If you take a look at a map of the Arctic area, you can see there are plenty of routes in there, and we're actually going to get to that in a minute. You can see there's plenty of routes in there. Obviously, Russia has a massive border. They don't need Greenland. Why would they need Greenland? They have the majority of the border that is in the Arctic anyway. Canada, our ally, also has a huge part of it. What you don't see there, you don't see China's border on there. China's not going to send anybody up there anyway, and they don't have the power. So you can literally take them off the map. The only one that has the potential, because Russia has a lot of icebreaker fleets and ships and other things in their navy, that there's at least the hypothetical possibility, but there's no reason why in God's name they would ever do that when you can see on the map that they have access. All that they ever would want is already there. So just at the surface level, that's absurd. But there's one other thing that hasn't occurred to many people yet, but I bet it will. I bet you'll see something about this from Russia coming up soon. I would be shocked if you don't. This logic he's using, the fact that he said, we are never going to let, in fact, Gary, let me ask you to play that clip again. It's not that long. I want to hear listen carefully to what he says here about the justification for why he won't allow Russia or China into Greenland.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor. Okay?
Actually, that's enough, Gary, that part right there. We are not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor. Remember that phrase. If it might sound familiar, just in a slightly different context, it should. Because that is the exact logic since 2008 that Russia has been using about NATO coming into Ukraine. That's what they've been saying. We are not going to have a situation to where NATO comes up to our very border, not in our hemisphere, a military alliance with all the military forces, with all the missile forces on our physical border, right? If you look at a map of that whole region, you can see that the planes basically have a big arrow pointing right to Moscow, which has been used as an invasion route twice before in the previous 2 centuries by the West against the Russian side. So they've said, we're not going to do that. We'll go to war to stop it. Now here's Trump using the exact same logic of saying, we're not going to allow either of these countries in our hemisphere. That's not even American territory, just in our hemisphere. And he said, we're not going to allow that. There's not. And so we'll take the possession of this other entity that belongs to a NATO ally in order to prevent that. So he is literally justifying what Putin's been saying this whole time. Now, we've said from the beginning, I used to say many times on this channel, even hypothetically, if anyone tried to do that into Mexico on our border, we would have the same reaction Russia did. So I said it's absurd to suggest they shouldn't. But now here we are in even a less direct correlation, not on our border, but just in the hemisphere. And even that causes the reaction to where Trump will violate every law that there is, international law there is, every convention that there is, and without even in a war against our very allies, seize some territory to prevent this theoretical invasion from China and Russia, which I'm showing you is virtually impossible and would never happen. Nevertheless, that's the justification that we're using. And then that, let's look also at what does that mean? Because one of the other things he also said in there was that there are ships in the Arctic, or he said previously rather, that there are Russian and Chinese ships all the time plying those waters. Gary, if you can put that map back up there, what you're going to see on this map here with these different colored lines here are the traditional routes that most shipping uses to go through the Arctic area. And you can see that Northwest Passage, the Transpolar Sea Route, and the Northern Sea Route. And so this is what international waters. Now, let's focus on the upper left-hand corner there, the Greenland. And you see that one Northwest Passage line comes kind of close to, at least it looks on the map, it's kind of close to Greenland. And you're like, okay, well, maybe that's what he's talking about, that he can see Chinese and Russian ships that are going on that route. Well, let me show you just how, because it looks really close on the map right here. But when you look even closer, I'm going to pull up Google Earth here. This is the Northwest route it was talking about, where that line that went through about right here. Let me see if I can make that bigger here. Oh, here we go. So that's what's going on. Now, this, just looking at you with nothing to compare to, you think, well, that's close. So maybe he's saying, well, that's not, we don't want those ships to be here. Well, let me show you how close that actually is, or how big of an area that actually is. So you can see just across what looks a short distance here, that's 212 miles. Now, as you may know, every country has 12 nautical miles of coastline is their territorial waters. Look at that. Let me go. There we go. There's 12 miles. You can't even tell it on this map. I'll have to blow it up a lot more so that you can see even there. Let's see. There's about 12 nautical miles, something like that. It's this tiny little fleck. That's how close you have to get before you even get into territorial waters, which means all of this is international waters. You understand what I'm saying here? Is that this is what every ship in the world, anywhere on the 7 seas, has an opportunity and a legal right to be anywhere. And you realize, of course, that the United States has long conducted what we call freedom of navigation operations, especially in the Taiwan Strait area, where we constantly say, we are sending American forces in there to make sure nobody can prevent us, even in the Taiwan Strait, which is only 100 miles across. And we'll sail through that because we won't get within 12 nautical miles of China's coast shore, but we'll get in the middle of that, so that I don't care what China thinks, we're going to have our oceans going right up here to make sure that everything stays free for international shipping. And of course, we have, since the Cold War, done the same thing up in the Russian area. We'll ply the waters of the Black Sea and several other places that are in international waters that aren't within 12 nautical miles. And now then, though, President Trump says, well, in our hemisphere, don't care. That doesn't matter. We're going to have a separate set of rules for us and for both of y'all. We're going to do what we want in our hemisphere. We're going to have military bases right up to your border. We're going to have, especially in China, we're going to have them dotted all throughout the region. Not economic spheres of influence, but physical military power stationed within missile range of the Chinese shore. They're supposed to be okay with all that. Russia's supposed to be okay with all that, but we're not even good with them being in the hemisphere. Not their ships, not their economic interests that they had in Venezuela, for example. We want none of that. And Trump is cool with doing it. He says, yeah, we'll continue to do that whether you like it or not. And as he told Denmark, basically, and Greenland and anyone who was listening, we'll do this the easy way or the not nice way, I think is the last way he put that. We'll see how that plays out. I don't think it's going to end well for us or anyone else. Well, at that same press conference, Trump had other things to say there. And that is on the situation with Iran. Now, I've been telling you for a while that there have been protests going on in Iran. And of course, we have history all the way through. And certainly in this Trump administration, in the previous Trump administration, he assassinated their leader, Soleimani. He threatened military force a couple of times, never used it. This one he has. He, quote, took out and obliterated their nuclear weapons program, which by all accounts, they never had a nuclear weapons program. They had a nuclear power program, but Trump claimed that he had destroyed it. Well, now then, subsequent to that, he said, well, if they don't have a new nuclear deal that we like, we may have to knock them down again. Now he's changed the terms again and saying, well, there's lots of protests in there. So if you do anything bad to those protesters, something bad could come. And watch this.
I just hope, just God bless them. I just hope the protesters in Iran are going to be safe, because it's a very dangerous place right now. And again, I tell the Iranian leaders, you better not start shooting, because we'll start shooting too.
Okay. Which is it? Is it American national security? Is it to help our ally Israel? Is it to help the people of Iran? I mean, what is it? You see, there's a growing problem here, is that we're wanting to use military power and coercion to compel compliance in all four corners of the world. That's what Trump is doing. And now then here, it seems like he's fishing for more justification to go back into Iran, or to have them upset by whatever means. If it's that protest on the end, it's an internal thing and they can knock them out. The Iranians themselves can knock out the mullahs. He seems to be okay with that. And one wonders, is he going to say, you know what, we'll help you out. So if they kill anybody, we'll come in and get them. And as you can see from the screen here, there is some no kidding serious protestings going on here in just the last 48 or 72 hours. There's been some mosques that have been just completely engulfed in flames. There have been lots of fires, lots of people killed. As a matter of fact, let's see. In one of the, I think it's Time Magazine, has said, already there has been over 200 reported dead in Tehran as the regime protest. This was yesterday's headline. More apparently have come in overnight. So the question is, if President Trump is saying that's going to be our standard, that's what we're going to use is to trigger military action. There's lots of people been killed already. Is Trump going to go in and do something there? He's also saying that reports indicate that the Ayatollah has already got his exit plan in place and is already looking to spirit away to Russia, for example, and to Moscow if things get too hairy. I don't know if that's true or not. I personally doubt that's true. I mean, the whole DNA of these guys has always been revolution, has always been standing up. Yeah, there's just more of the incredible fires going on inside of Tehran. The regime symbols are being taken down. Lots of stuff going on. This is genuinely serious. This is something we're going to be continuing to cover here. But one wonders if Trump is going to try to wade in on that and actually, quote, help the protesters. It never works out well. And listen, man, if people are saying, look, this is our golden opportunity here, we can finally get rid of the mullahs. If you think that getting rid of the mullahs by a mob like this is going to result in something beneficial to the United States, or that whoever would take control after this mob rule seizes power, that suddenly they're going to be all friendly with the West, going to go back to the days of the Shah of Iran, which sparked the last 1979 revolution, don't hold your breath. More than likely that things would not go well. And I think that our history of trying regime change with no idea what's going to come next would probably backfire like a lot of others. So I don't know what President Trump has in mind here. I hope it's not what it looks like. Okay, let's move on. Let's move over to Europe here. So we had earlier this week, we had Alexander Mercurius, who was talking about the first of the week. There was this big meeting in Paris where the coalition of the willing was getting together, and they had this big pomp and circumstance, they're backslapping, hugging, smiles, everything like that. And Alexander says, hey, you know what? About that meeting, let's look at the outcome.
Yesterday, we were working with our NATO allies, including the US, our NATO ally, on a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. That will not happen without security guarantees from the coalition of the willing, backed by the United States.
What Starmer is basically telling us is that the meeting in Paris really didn't decide anything. Absolutely. He says so himself. He says this is a political declaration. The actual military decision was taken a long time ago. So again, coming back to the question, what in that case was that the purpose of that meeting in Paris? They're just saying the same thing again and again and again. They're still talking about ceasefires that the Russians, who have a veto over the matter, as Merz has said, as Maloney is saying, as Starmer himself said. He said that there has to be a legal agreement first. A legal agreement is one that the Russians have to agree to. They have a veto of that over this matter. They're in a position to enforce that veto. And they are saying no.
Well, it's really hard to improve on anything Alexander said there. He said it pretty concisely, and that is where we are. So all of this stuff that you're still seeing on the screen there, that's about the most that was produced by that meeting. Is a lot of good video and happy things for them, but that evaporated pretty soon after that. And speaking of evaporated, that also on the backside of this, one of the other things Alexander talked about while he was on the show this week was about what could be a Russian response to this about, hey, while you guys are talking about having a negotiated settlement without us, by the way, we're still here, and I'm going to send you a little message through something called an Oreshnik missile.
Of course, the key thing to say is that, of course, they've also demonstrated that they have the ability to strike targets anywhere in Ukraine, including in Western Ukraine, with devastating power. I mean, they now have this missile. It can reach anywhere, not just in Ukraine, but across continental Europe. And it can do so at incredible velocities and with very little warning. And there's no air defense that's possible against it. Now, showing that you can reach targets in Western Ukraine is important, perhaps, because on the 6th of January, Britain and France and Ukraine signed a statement of intent about deploying Western forces, European troops, to Ukraine. And they were talking, Macron said, that these troops would be stationed in Western Ukraine, far away from the front lines, and would not be in any great danger. Well, we could see that they would be in danger because the Russians have a missile system that could reach that far and could attack those troops in those locations if they chose to.
That pretty much sums it up there as well. This Oreshnik missile cannot be stopped by anything that the West has. And even though Kaja Kallas said in the aftermath, we need to send more air defense systems, I'm not sure she's aware, but there is no more air defense systems that we have to give, number one. Number two, if we gave all that we have, it's still not going to make any difference, because we can't stop those. And I think that was the big message there. And by the way, somebody just sent me something here. I want to read something. I mentioned a minute ago that Trump was sharing these messages that the Ayatollah in Iran apparently had an exit plan set to go, and he's ready to go. Well, just apparently a little bit ago, like maybe hours ago, on the Friday prayers, or actually it was yesterday, I guess it was last night, on the Friday prayers, the Ayatollah had a little bit different of a message. And what he said here was that that fella sitting there in arrogance and pride in Washington, D.C., judging the whole world, he should know that usually the tyrants, and I'm sorry, I'm reading this as it subtitles, arrogant people around the world, such as Pharaoh, Nimrod, Reza Khan, Mohammed Raza, and the like, were overthrown when they were at the height of their pride. And this one will also be overthrown, in a bunch of people cheering. So he's the Ayatollah. It appears to be, this is what I would have expected. That's his whole DNA, his whole thing. I mean, since the 1979 and all the way through the mullahs, it's about standing up to imperial powers. So it just seemed pretty unlikely that because it got a little uncomfortable that they're going to be hitting the exit. I think that was trying to tell people inside of Iran that, hey, just keep going because it'll just a little more and you'll overthrow him. But you see that he's not. He's out in public telling everybody, no, when tyrants do this, they end up falling. And he is saying Donald Trump is going to be the one to fall. We'll probably still be here, and he's going to be the one to go down. So that's just kind of a little ad there on the put a coda, I guess, on the Iran piece, that Trump's thinking this, it's not going to go well. And so then the question is going to be now then, and by the way, that kind of in your face, I'm calling you pride and arrogance and you're going to fall. Maduro did that. That's claimed that one of the justifications that Trump used to actually order him to be taken out was because, and remember, I mentioned this at the time it happened when he was doing Maduro was doing all his dances and mocking Trump, whatever. I said that wouldn't go over well. I thought it would just make Trump mad. I didn't know it would actually cause him to take military action, but apparently that's what it did. One wonders, will that same dynamic play out here if while all these protests are going on, and Gary showed you this, they're genuine, they're legit, and there's a lot of destruction, fire, people being killed, etc. But if their reaction is, okay, in your face, you're probably going to be brought down too. Gary's now showing it to you there on the screen. Will Trump take action now? Because it's easy for us to do. Let me just tell you, we've got a lot of power in the region, and it's easy for him to give the order. We've done it so many times over the decades, so we could. Man, I hope he doesn't, because that will backfire. That will not go down well. All right, well, I want to move on to the next piece here because it might also be a little bit related. If I'm arguing that if Trump or all these other people who are just almost lusting to get rid of the Ayatollah regime and think they're going to overthrow it and have something better come in its place, Rajan Menon was talking to us today about history and how the idea that a regime change in Venezuela would be good. Some of these concepts overlap. Watch this.
You're essentially taking charge of a country as if it were a bankrupt company and trying to turn it around. That's hard enough to do. Remember the last time we did this in Libya? Said Muammar Gaddafi is a terrible guy. And we knocked off the regime. A civil war began. And Libya has since then had at least 2 governments. It's crawling with warlords and drug traders. And many of the immigrants that are crossing the Mediterranean Sea fleeing for their lives, that have got right-wing parties in Europe excited, are doing that to escape Libya, or others come to Libya because it's an escape route. And, there's Iraq to point to. There's Afghanistan to point to. So Trump will say, that's them. I will pull off the greatest regime change in the history of mankind. That's the way he says it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that worries me, because I think Trump does believe that he is capable of nothing but success. He's actually said it here in the last 10 days or so when someone was asking him some of these very questions, and he says, no, in fact, at a press conference shortly after this whole coup had turned out, not coup, well, yeah, I guess it was a coup. We did take out the elected leader or the guy who was in place, even if you think that he was fraudulently in place. It doesn't matter. He was the leader. We did take him out, so by definition, that's a coup. After that happened, he was specifically asked in an Oval Office meeting, I think it was, by a reporter, we have not done very well historically with regime change. Why do you think this is going to go good? And he waved off. He says, no, that was them, not me. I have only had success militarily, politically. Everything I've done has only worked. Now, it's one thing to just be bragging, and Trump has kind of has a pattern of that, but it's a more troubling thing if he believes it, and I think he does. I think it's not just hyperbole now. I think he has said it so many times, and so many of these things have worked out in the near term, in the interim, the way he wanted them to, and it didn't have any blowback or pushback or catastrophic failure, that he thinks it never will. And so that makes him bolder and bolder the next time, a la Greenland. And if you keep believing that, then you may even take more trouble and do something in Iran to where there's even more reason to think that would blow up in our faces. Because believe me, whatever we would do in there, it's not the same thing here. And the bigger issue at stake is, just like it was in Libya, this example that he gave there a second ago, in Libya, we succeeded. We took out Muammar Gaddafi. What did that result in? A civil war. And to this day, there are still competing governments. That was 2011. And to now here, 2026, we still have competing governments. That hasn't been solved, and the people of Libya have paid for it. We took out Saddam Hussein. How did that work out? A civil war. We called it an insurgency, but it was the Sunnis and the Shias, and it turned into a civil war that went on for a long time, gave rise to ISIS. That's directly where ISIS came. I don't know if you're aware of that, but in the immediate aftermath of the insurgency that cropped up there in the Sunni-based insurgency, we tamped it down for a while. But then the guy that was leading it was killed, and then it turned into a guy named al-Baghdadi picked up the pieces of that, and then over the next several years formed ISIS until he was killed, and they're going to form into something different. But all of that came from our invasion of getting rid of Saddam Hussein in 2003. And to an extent, we're still paying the price for that to this day. So we need to be sober-minded about this regime change stuff and always thinking that something's going to work better when it almost always works out bad. At some point, you think, man, do we ever learn a lesson? There's hardly any times it has worked out good. And even when it's worked out, relatively successful, there's some pretty big asterisks there. But most of the time, there aren't any asterisks because it's not good. It's just absolutely bad. Don't have to go much further than Afghanistan for that one. That's the worst one. I mean, obviously, you could go back to Vietnam, but in the near term, in the recent history, we went in there with ostensibly what many considered just reasons to go in 2001, in October of 2001 after 9/11. But then instead of just doing a military operations to punish the Taliban for allegedly giving aid and comfort to Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, after we destroyed them, instead of saying, all right, that's it, we're going to done now, it's a peacekeeping operation, whatever, or a humanitarian operation. You didn't need any more military because you completely destroyed the Taliban. Instead of doing that, we stayed, turned it into a nation building thing. And then, of course, it was a 2-decade disaster, ended with this image that Gary's showing here, something that will be a stain in our history for the foreseeable future. We don't need to see something else like this after 2 decades of disaster and lost revenue and thousands of American troops killed and wounded, hundreds of thousands with PTSD, et cetera. A complete disaster. We don't even need to think about going down that route again. Speaking of civil war, Larry Johnson, one of our favorite guests that we love to have on, he was also talking about that possibility inside of Venezuela. If we go further, see, because here's the situation right now. We didn't do a regime change so far. We've done a leader change. We took out Maduro, but his entire administration, all of his handpicked folks are still in power, still in office. President Rodriguez has been there for, I think, a couple of decades, if I'm not mistaken, in various levels, but been a high-ranking official for quite a long time and is now the acting president of the country. And all of the apparatus that went in there with all the protection and the power ministries, et cetera, are all still fully engaged. Now, if they don't do as they're told, according to Trump, if they don't, as Jack Keane said this past week, bend the knee to our will and do what we're told, then we may have to go in there and force compliance. In that event, if you actually do a regime change, now then you have the possibility of a civil war, as Larry lays out here.
The most likely scenario out of this is Venezuela is going to descend into a civil war. The United States will happily supply the opposition groups with weapons, and the establishment that's there will fight back. They've got ample supplies of weapons. Let's assume that the U.S. side prevails. They take over. Well, the Chavistas, they simply retreat to the jungles. And if anybody thinks it's easy to root groups out of the jungles, just look at next door in Colombia.
Yeah,
where the FARC has been going on for 64 years, despite extensive counterintelligence, counterinsurgent operations with the help of the U.S. 64 years.
Yeah.
So, like I said, this is not going to extend U.S. influence in the region. If anything, I think it's going to have the exact opposite effect of galvanizing opposition to the United States in a way that hasn't existed before.
Now, it's interesting that we showed that headline there where you saw the President Petro of Colombia saying, come get me, you coward, and all that. Subsequent to that episode that we pulled that from, Trump gets on the phone, and according to the New York Times, Trump initiated the call, got on the phone with Petro, came out afterwards and issued this Truth Social saying about, I had a wonderful conversation with him. Everything's cool. It's good to go. We're besties now. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that was the gist and that was the tenor of the thing. So after declaring that we went into Venezuela to protect the American people because of all the drugs that are coming in, and everybody who does this is going to pay that same price, and everybody is aware that the lion's share of the fentanyl, especially that comes into the United States, much of it is originating in Colombia and then it goes through Mexico to come into our borders through all the various places that it does, not Venezuela. So now then the justification for having leader change in Venezuela that was applied to Colombia now all of a sudden isn't provided to Colombia. Nothing has changed. The fentanyl is still made in Colombia. It's still going to find its way into the United States by whatever means. But now all of a sudden Trump's fine with it. I mean, it's the same thing with, I think it was the Nicaraguan leader that was convicted of funneling tons of cocaine into the United States, convicted in a court of law where it was proven, and then he gave him a pardon. So it is painfully clear that this is, that's the one right there. It was a great honor to speak with President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, et cetera. So it's not about drugs. It's not about keeping America safe, as it is painfully evident. It is all about the oil. And if anyone still had any doubts about that, there was a meeting yesterday that President Trump convened with oil executives, one of whom was from ExxonMobil, who put a little bit of cold water on the enthusiasm Trump may have.
We have a very long history in Venezuela. In fact, we first got into Venezuela back in 1940s. We've had our assets seized there twice. And so you can imagine to re-enter a third time would require some pretty significant changes from what we've historically seen here and what is currently the state. If we look at the legal and commercial constructs and frameworks in place today in Venezuela, today it's uninvestable. And so significant changes have to be made to those commercial frameworks, the legal system. There has to be durable investment protections, and there has to be a change to the hydrocarbon laws in the country. We're confident that with this administration and President Trump working hand in hand with the Venezuelan government, that those changes can be put in place.
Now, listen, this is something I said right away, and this is not evidence that I've got some kind of deep understanding. This is pretty basic, folks. This is like 101, economics 101.
And Danny, check out what Trump said the day before, 24 hours before. This is how he painted the picture.
What is your ultimate goal for the governance of Venezuela?
Prisoners that nobody thought they would ever see again. So we're going to be working with them and leadership of the country. And so far, we've been working very well. You know, we picked up the Russian freighter that trudged out there.
Well, I want to ask you about that.
Well, they had some Russian ships guarding it, and they decided not to mess around with us. And we took that one. And that's unloading the oil. But we're taking billions and billions of dollars worth of oil, and it'll be hundreds of billions of dollars. It'll be trillions of dollars. But we're going to be there till we straighten out the country. We'll see how the country's doing. But we'll be running the oil. We're meeting tomorrow with all of the big oil executives here. The top 14 companies are coming here. They're going to go in. They're going to rebuild the whole oil infrastructure. They're going to spend at least $100 billion. And it's an unbelievable oil that they have and an unbelievable quality of oil and amount of oil.
I mean, there's no room for any interpretation or any doubt. It was always about the oil, and you hear him. Oh, I was cringing almost more about him talking about we're going to get their country governance straightened out. Oh my God, are you serious? I mean, one of the biggest problems with Venezuela's governance has been this profound level of corruption, which is why the country has been driven into the dirt on top of these sanctions that we've had on them. That certainly didn't help. But you want to fix that, and because here's the thing. You have to do two things. You have to, if you're going to do the last part about get all this oil and have all these oil execs come in, you have to get that sorted out. Because as the CEO of Exxon said in the other clip we showed yesterday, he said, we have a history here of it not working out well. There has, I think it was in 1976 is when the first time I think Venezuela in the relative near past nationalized its oil industry and took a lot of the infrastructure and investment that the Western companies had made. And then I think it was again under Chavez, and I forget the year 2009, something like that. I may be off on the second one, but it did happen a second time. That's what he was talking about. So we already have a lot of negative reaction with losing a lot of money that had been invested. So if you can't get that squared away, there's not going to be a third one. That's what he's telling you there. You saw Trump in the conversation with Hannity talking like it's a past tense, like we're already done. Yep, we're going to do this. We're going to have this oil. It's beautiful oil. It's high quality oil. It's oil, but it is what's called heavy oil. And it is, I think some even call it dirty oil because it can only be reprocessed in a handful of places around the world because it is not the sweet crude that is the majority of places, like in Saudi Arabia, for example, and in other places. This one, it requires special kinds of facilities to turn it into petroleum, to diesel, all kinds of stuff, a lot of which are on the United States coast in Texas and in Louisiana. We specifically built those because we can, we're one of the few people that can put in the infrastructure and the investment over time that was necessary to be able to do that. That is vital to be able to do that. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Trump is thinking we're going to have the oil, because we're one of the only ones that can reprocess it. So everybody around the world will benefit, i.e. will make money from it. But you're not going to make any money from it unless you have stability in Venezuela. And you just have to understand it's common sense, it's logic, it's rational thinking. The people in Venezuela, and I'm talking about the oligarchs, I'm talking about people who are in positions of power that have been put there by Maduro and Chavez before that, they are not going to just give up their positions. You're not going to just go in there and clean it up because they have incentive and motivation not to. There's a reason why we have been working for multiple decades with the governments in Colombia to try and bring the FARC and some of these other folks and other drug lords into heel to get them out of the picture so that there is not, the drug infrastructure. And so there's not all of these kingpins and all of that. Same thing in Mexico. They have been working for decades. I mean, they literally have a war on drugs inside of Mexico. And unlike the one that we had under Reagan, et cetera, which is more rhetorical than anything else, this one was an actual war with a lot of bloodshed and people being killed on both sides. And it is a war they still fight to this day. You have got to somehow have a situation where you're going to, quote, clean that up so that the people like Exxon will come in there. And they're not, I'm just telling you, there was enormous pressure on him to just say yes, sir, to whatever President Trump said. And yet there he was in front of everybody, sitting right next to Susie Wiles, her arms folded, not liking what she was hearing. He said, we're not going to do it a third time until you can get this squared away. We're not going to go and invest billions of dollars that, by the way, in the best case scenario, Trump is going to be out of office in 3 years. My concern is that his health may not even get him there. That remains to be seen. But in any case, forget it. This whole idea that he's going to run again in 2028, nobody is going to put him in power. There's no way. Even if he came up with some plausible reason or just forced it in and said, yeah, I declare that the Constitution no longer applies in the amendments and I'm going to run for a third term. Even if he did that, he doesn't have the health, folks. He didn't have the stamina. There's no way that he's going to go another 4 years on top of that and that people would put him in there because he just wouldn't survive that long. So that's not going to happen. So these guys are looking and they're saying, you want me to, for a third time, risk that once you're out of power and, you're the only one crazy enough to go in and seize the country, the leader of another country by force of arms. Nobody else is going to do that. Nobody had done it before. Definitely nobody's going to do it afterwards. Most likely no one's going to do it afterwards. I can't speak for what could come in the future, but the likelihood is that they won't. And in any case, you got to understand that all these people who would be losing out on this fixing it you're talking about will do everything in their power to throw monkey wrenches into the gears, to sabotage all this stuff, to have, even if it's a low level insurgency or just lawlessness, whatever you want to talk about, to make sure that these companies don't succeed. They don't want them to be able to come in there and invest billions of dollars and profit from it and take all these resources out and bypassing all these guys. It's just human nature. The idea that this is going to happen is just unrealistic. And that is really kind of part of our bigger problem here. And that is Trump's mentality and how he views right and wrong, rule of law, morality, and that kind of thing. And I'm actually going to ask Gary to come on and join me here in this part here because I want to have a conversation. And we're going to start off with a soundbite from David Petraeus because he's going to say something in this soundbite here, Gary, that I think kind of sets the stage that many people are agreeing with Trump and are cheering him on. But I think there's a darker side to this. First, let's play this one by Petraeus.
he uses all of his leverage. Let's go back to his own words, Art of the Deal, where he says you should use every tool that you have, flex your muscles before you sit down. In fact, before you sit at the table, punch the other guy in the nose. So these are unconventional means. It's using the leverage that we have. One will hope that obviously there's listening to those on the Hill, such as Senator McConnell and others, talking about the vital importance of NATO. Obviously, Denmark controls the Greenland territory. NATO member, we have a base in Greenland. If we want more facilities or infrastructure, I'm sure that Denmark would be happy to negotiate that with us. If it's that we need more of the strategic minerals and rare earths, again, I'm sure that they're open for discussion on that. And we have a lot more influence right now, a lot more leverage, I think, to get what it is that we presumably want.
Okay, Gary, I'm going to ask you to do something a little unconventional myself here. Can you play that video again from your browser so that you can freeze it at a certain point?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, give me a second.
Yeah, as you're getting that set up there, this is a Saturday. This is our Intel Brief show. So I'm going to take a little bit of an excursion here. There's something about this image, because this is something that Petraeus has used many times. This scene, I guess, if you will, maybe it's his office, I guess.
Yeah.
It really bothers me. There's a couple of things in here that I keep, every time I'm listening to him, I keep being distracted. And I'm looking at a couple of things in here, and I want to point those out. And I'm thinking, okay, if this is a guy that, is really with it, and he wants to project, a sense of aura and power and confidence, and that you should listen to me, I'm thinking he needs to do a reboot on his background and on his desk.
He uses all of his leverage.
Okay, put the pause right there. Okay,
absolutely.
Why does he have a deflated football on the side of his office right there? Why
Danny,
not?
do you remember a year ago we pointed this out? And think of it, a whole year ago, he must love that football, love the image of it, what it portrays, because he's not getting rid of it. You would have thought, he would have said, oh my gosh, what am I doing? It's still there.
And yeah, and that conveys a message, at least that I'm receiving, probably not the one that he wants, because I see that deflated football, and I think that your advice is deflated.
Exactly.
Everything that you're saying here is flat, just like that football. You can't use it.
It's old, it's worn out. Exactly. Good for nothing. Like that. It's good for nothing. Kicking around. That's it.
It doesn't even look good, much less, can you play a game with it? Then there's the issue of all these pictures on the wall. I mean, they're not symmetrical. Some of them are tilted, and you can't tell what a lot of them are. I'm sure it's famous people. I can't zoom in on them, but they're just haphazardly thrown up on the wall, and then you have all this white space around it, and brown. It's just not a good look.
No, it's so old school, Danny. It's archaic. It's out of date. And
maybe I'm nitpicking, but anyway, I'm sorry to go to that. I just couldn't let it pass one more time without having some comment. But let's get more to the deflated football substance of what he was saying here. What he said in this soundbite was that he's okay with the unconventional level of what Trump does. He's okay with it in Venezuela, and he's okay with it in Greenland with our allies. Basically, he's saying that the rule of law, international norms, the rules-based order, forget it all. He's completely agreeing with Trump. And again, this is a 4-star general that a lot of people still revere to this day. He's always having a mic put in his face. People in the West, especially major media, love to listen to him. And he's telling everybody, yeah, you can do this. And in fact, if you want to go and take this from Greenland, then yeah, why not? And I'm sure that they'll understand one of these days. They'll get a deal you can't refuse, that kind of thing. Yeah. How do you see, let's first start with Petraeus and those like him, not Trump, but on him, what do you see with that? Because that to me is more a problem, that even at the intellectual level, we're not following rule of law anymore.
Well, obviously it's a huge problem. And Danny, I think one of the problems is there's how many people like Petraeus are in Trump's ear with that kind of advice, with the backslapping, with the encouragement. What he says, he's got leverage, he's got influence. That's what they're relying upon. They think that is going to make the day, and Trump's happy to hear it. They're happy to tell him. I think that's the dynamic at play. Are there any resistors around him? You saw how Tulsi has been sidelined. Even if she was going to speak up, we don't know if she would speak up or not. But she's been sidelined. So, pardon me, anybody that's going to take issue with the steamroller that's about to roll is irrelevant to them. I think that's why they're running on the steam of what we just heard Petraeus portray.
Yeah, and we know, because I think we used some sound bites earlier in the week of Jack Keane, obviously Lindsey Graham, who's the biggest cheerleader for all that they are totally behind it, and now you see that eking its way out into the media, even on CNN, where they had Stephen Miller. I mean, he actually makes Lindsey Graham look passive in comparison, and he is in the President Trump's right ear. So he'll be telling him all these things and saying, "Yes, Mr. President, keep going, go even further." And what do you think? What is your opinion of what you think the impact this has on Europeans right now, especially Denmark, about whether he's going to take this? And let's use as a pivot there the point that what Stephen Miller said, that nobody's going to fight us for it. So if we threaten to fight or just seize by occupation Greenland, what do you think is going to happen?
Danny, I don't know. I'm curious that you see the tide is starting to turn a little bit when you saw both Merz and Maloney start to agree. Maybe the tack that we've been taking, our strong hand of resupply Ukraine all the time, no matter what, and now they're actually saying, you know what, maybe this isn't working. So I wonder if they're rethinking everything about the dynamic and the shift that's going on with Trump coming on so strong. They've tried to not resist him, but they realize that he's not completely on board with them. So now that they couldn't persuade him after all this time to come on board with them, and they realize that he's his own man, he's taking his own path. I don't think they're gonna stand up to him much at all. I think they're gonna step back and watch.
I mean, it's hard to come to any other conclusion,
right?
And then see the troubling part to me is, and then what? Yeah. So if he's attacked Iran once, may do it again. If he has fired missiles into Nigeria, if he has fired missiles into Yemen, of course we did that a lot. Assassinated some people even in Baghdad in this administration. Then had this snatch and grab of an elected leader in Venezuela, and then if he then seizes Greenland by force from an ally, do we think that the next 3 years he's going to stop doing all that? The reason why this is troubling, this is piece in the New York Times here, where it says Trump lays out a vision of power restrained only by my own morality. And Gary, he doesn't have a morality. It's all about transactional and what he thinks he can get away with. I'm concerned about that. How about you?
Yeah, of course. Listen, anybody they're drunk on themselves. He's drunk on the power. And we don't have to discuss, what's going on throughout history with people that get drunk on their own power. My gosh, usually it doesn't last that long. And how long can he go with this fuel of his own, self aggrandizing? It's taken him this far, in his mind, as you hear all the wars that he stopped, all the successes that he had. We are the most powerful, not only the people that we have, but the weapons that we have, and nobody can touch us. Boy, that's hard to penetrate a determination like that. Again, when we know that he's surrounded by people that are only feeding that what we just read, and that yes, Mr. President, yes, Mr. President, and it's public too. Every time, how many times do we see them at their cabinet meetings? Oh, Mr. President, before they even tell about whatever their expertise is in their field, and whatever their secretary of. I have to stop and say, you're the best president in the world that I've ever seen, I've ever been under. You kudos. It's quite something. So boy, he's completely drunk on that.
Now, let me ask you a potentially uncomfortable question. And just for everybody's knowledge, I didn't even think about this until just now, so I didn't give Gary a heads up on what I wanted to talk about here. But that comment there, that headline, Trump will listen to his own morality. How do you think that squares with so many people like Franklin Graham, like several other members of Congress I've seen lately that says, this is the most godly president we've ever had. And, and he is following Jesus. He was sent here as an instrument by God, etc. When he publicly declares, I am my own morality. He didn't even give fake concession to saying, well, I listen to God or whatever. That didn't even come out of his mouth. It was, I listen to my own morality. How does that square with people who say that, we're supporting him because he's a godly president?
Right, I know, Danny, you got to wonder, what are they saying? Listen, I think how many Bible studies there are internally in the administration there. Some of them have even talked about it publicly. They all are, Hegseth, go down the line. They're all having these Bible studies all the time. So it's not like they're divorced from trying to be obedient to the word. So when they do hear that, does it even rub them a little bit that he says it like that? That they're not approaching him on that. And do you think that Franklin Graham, when he's there, pulls him to the side, by the way, Mr. President, just a little note here, that I don't think that's going on, Danny, at all. And so they'll proclaim and they'll talk all that, meaning the people around him, the administration, their devotion to God. They don't say Jesus necessarily, but they'll say their devotion, to righteousness, let's say. But boy, oh boy, does it get past? Does it ever get to tapping the president on the shoulder? No.
And it's a great thing potentially to do Bible studies. And I know you've been in some. I've been in a bunch. I've led them in the past in my previous lives. But the Bible is also very clear, where Jesus himself said, the man who looks at what's in the Bible and doesn't do it, and then walks away and forgets what's in it, is a foolish man. So if you have these Bible studies, but you don't actually do what's being told, and then you do these kind of things, that's a problem all on its own.
I'd say so. I think he's pretty clear, the Lord. He says, I am a jealous God. And dare you sit on the throne of his. It's his throne. Don't try to be put his crown on your head.
Yeah, and listen, I know a lot of people, they are not Christians. There's some are atheists, some are agnostic, some are 100 other things, and that's part of our secular world. So that everybody can make their own choices about all that stuff. But for those that call themselves followers of Jesus Christ, there should be a problem. They should feel uncomfortable when you see the things that the Bible says, and you see the things that we're doing at the highest levels are incompatible. I mean, they're not even related, other than a few words here and there, but the actions are not. And at some point, I think that there's some of these people, and maybe Franklin Graham's one of them, is going to have to make a decision. Who are you following? Are you following what the Bible says and what Jesus says, who you claim to follow, or are you following Trump? Because they're incompatible. I mean, that's a hard statement to say, but how do you see that?
Yeah, no. How can they? You can't go the distance and keep silent. At some point, and when is that point? When somebody decides that it's their own morality, right? So all of a sudden, the Bible, the morality. No, we don't need that. I've figured it out. There's a new morality that it's the Don Rowe doctrine of morality.
Yeah, that's not likely to end well, especially if you actually believe what the Bible says. If you believe that God is true, that won't go over well. You said it a second ago. God says, I'm a jealous God, and I don't give my glory to anybody. Amen. So you can't take my name and then do what you want. It just doesn't work out well.
Nah.
Let's see. Well, listen, that's I know this is not Sunday, so it's a little bit of a sermonizing there.
Preach it, brother. Preach it.
But it's just something that it's obviously very close to my heart, and it's something I think is important. And I mean, even if other presidents in the past have given lip service to a lot of Christian stuff, they at least tried to obey it, or try to apply it rather in their lives. But now then we're kind of moving beyond that, and I don't think it's going to go well for us, because the morality, even if you don't believe in the Bible, the morality in there is clearly superior and a great prospect to use to base your behavior. And now it seems that we're just throwing that out the window, and it's a power politics. And I'm just telling you, historically, even that just doesn't usually work out well. So,
how often do we hear people say this week, Danny, on our show, I mean, that the resort, actually in the administration too, it's now the law of the jungle, really. That's what it's come down to. We've tried being diplomatic, we've tried talking, we've tried a lot of different things. We've tried different presidents. It's not working. That's why this president, with the law of the jungle, is going to get things done. And you can see what we've brought about, and we're just going to continue on the road that we've now established in this new administration.
Yeah, that's a great point. They're not even saying it, behind the scenes. They're bragging about it. Yes, it's all about power, as Stephen Miller said. It's about the law of the jungle, as that representative said, and bragging about it. And that's just not the country that I grew up in or want to live in. And I want to see that change and come back to something that is based on the rule of law and on morality that's above any individual man. But
Yeah.
We got what we got, and we have to deal with it. But we are unintimidated and uncompromised, both Gary and I, and we are going to tell the truth as we see it. And you can do with it whatever you want to. But we really care about you guys, and we really appreciate you coming on, especially on a Saturday like this. Look forward to seeing you next week, where we're going to have a lot of good guests, and we will see you next week on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Amen. Yep.
You know, we don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.